So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Todd is amazing, so I know Heather is amazing. And I reached out to him and asked him a question. He said, well, you can't speak to me without having Heather on the platform with me because of this work we've done together. And so I would like to ask you to one, tell us about the work. Give us the name and a description of this, what I'd like to say awesome, out of a lack of a better word. I'm trying to find a much stronger word, contribution to the advocacy of these type of situations that the two of you have put together.
Great. Well, I mean, one project we've been working on for about 5 years now is the George Floyd and Anti-Racist Street Art Archive. And basically, it's a collection of images that we started to put together after George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020. And it includes all kinds of images like graffiti, stickers, wheat paste, murals, Black Lives Matter street murals. We've just crowdsourced that and collected images from all around the country and all around the world. And then we've done things like written descriptions. We're working on interviewing artists and bringing their voices in, getting the voices of community members in as much as we can as well. And we just really wanted to create this more permanent archive that would collect these images and make them available for people to learn from, study from, look back at in the future, and understand the kinds of conversations that people are having right now. And I guess I shouldn't say right now because it's been 5 years, right? So the conversation has evolved over that course of time too. So it's become a sort of historical record now that we think is important.
But I think people still are having the conversation, right? Like that came out of this moment. And as we know, like George Floyd wasn't the last person to be killed by police, right? So This is an ongoing issue. It's still happening. And I think in the moment that this happened, we were already studying and documenting street art in the Twin Cities, and particularly in our city of St. Paul. And this happened in our city in Minneapolis, so we saw the art go up. We saw, all of this proliferation of art all over the city, on boards, on street posts, on the streets itself, and so, but we knew that it being a fleeting kind of artistic expression, that they would be, cleaned up, buffed, whatever, and that in a couple of years, some people would act as if it had never happened, right? And so, which is actually what's happening. Come to fruition, right? That's exactly what's happened. And so we wanted to try to be a part of documenting it, to try to preserve it so that people could not just go back and see, oh, this is what was happening at the time, but that people could learn about it and could do research, just engage with the images as in lots of different ways, probably ways that we haven't even thought about yet. So that's part of what we were trying to do.
No, I dig it. Now, Heather said something that evoked a question, and then Todd further, I guess you could not push the envelope, but brought me to where I wanted to go with the idea of, prior to George Floyd, you all were doing this work. So is it safe to say it's not just murals and street art based on cop killings? And the reason why I asked you that, just for context, growing up where I grew up, every 5 blocks is a mural of a victim. I'll just put it that way. Right? And it's not necessarily always, sometimes it's inner community, if you will. So I set it up that way to ask, prior to George Floyd, what inspired or evoked you all to begin this work of street art, and what were you looking at?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we started studying street art together in 2018. And at that time, we were just really interested in the idea that people were communicating on walls. People were putting up graffiti, they were putting up murals, and some people were walking by it and thinking nothing of it, or maybe they were dismissing it as criminal activity. But we thought people had something important to say on walls. And so when we first started the project, that's really what inspired us, just to be like, this isn't a conversation that's taking place. Let's stop and look at it and think what people are saying about the world around them. And so in the beginning, we were really interested in the idea of gentrification. We were studying a neighborhood in St. Paul called Midway, and we were thinking about how that neighborhood was changing and what people were saying about the changes in the neighborhood and about the community through the work they were putting up on walls. So that's really what I'd say inspired us in the beginning, do you think?
Yeah, and it was, I mean, Heather isn't mentioning that like this was all her idea in the beginning, and she brought together with herself, myself, a folklorist, and our other colleague Paul Laura, who is a geographer. And so we get the mapping part from him. Like he helped us to see how we could connect like whatever we were documenting, give it an address, put it on a map, and that would help us to see spatial relationships and sort of understand those things. We were thinking about, Heather, of course, is an art historian. So we were like wanting to look at the pieces and analyze them as pieces of art and to think about the artistic dimensions of like something that is readily accepted as art, like a mural, and something that is not necessarily readily accepted as art, which is like a tag or even a sticker or, the things that are more associated with like property destruction and criminality. And then, of course, me as a folklorist, I'm interested in the storytelling, and I'm interested in the expression, like group expression, vernacular expression that comes out of group experience. And so we put all that stuff together, and that's where the project was at the beginning. And like Heather said, trying to use street art as a way to see it into or understand the dynamic of what was happening in a neighborhood over the course of time, how people were responding to, for example, in Midway, there was a big light rail project that went like right down the middle, really the south edge of that neighborhood, and really impacted it. And then there was right after that, there was the building of a big soccer stadium, a big sort of public works soccer stadium project that changed the way that the neighborhood looked, and all these things that were happening that were impacting who could live there, who wanted to live there, all these different things. And it was being expressed through the art. So that was a real thing that we wanted to think about. And then, of course, as often happens, you're in the middle of doing work and then something happens you didn't foresee. First, it was COVID. Like a big part of our work initially was we were out in the streets with student teams and ourselves, like interviewing people, talking to them in person about their impression of the art. And like, we couldn't do that anymore. And then, Heather started to see online that people were posting images of street art that was associated with COVID, right? And so started to make like a list of those, a spreadsheet, and like a spreadsheet turned out to not be sufficient. And then we decided like, an archive, maybe that's the thing. Even though we're not archivists, we're not.
We
trained.
Are now.
Yeah, we only by like having done it, like DIY. But over time we've learned a lot about archiving from trial and error from other archivists who've sort of helped us and things. And so we started archiving, and then when George Floyd was murdered, and we saw the art really just like proliferate in the community in that same neighborhood in Midway, which is, I live in Midway. So we were both out in the streets in Midway the day after the most intense uprising in that area. And there was just like art everywhere. So you see immediately like the art wasn't something that just happened alongside of the uprising. Like it was a part of it. Mm-hmm. An essential integrated like aspect of the uprising, that people turned to art to express these really intense feelings. They used it to like deal with their feelings. They used it to mourn. They used it for all these sort of reasons that were a part of why they were out in the streets. And again, like we knew that it wasn't going to last. And some people, made the decision to actually like try to collect the actual physical boards. We knew that wasn't something that we could do, and it wasn't something that we felt like we should do. Right. But to get images of everything, of as much as we could, and we couldn't do that by ourselves. We needed to ask people to help us, and so we put out a call, and people answered the call and started to send us their images, and That's how we started to go from like, 100, a couple hundred images to now more than 3,500 or something like that, right?
Wow.
I'm thinking a lot about not collecting the physical boards, which we had lots of reasons for that. But one thing that strikes me as we're talking about this is the things that matter to us. It matters to us what the art does. Like, we really believe the art is out in the world. It's doing something. It's acting on people's lives. It's saying something, but it's also all about people. And it's not about the physical objects themselves. It's about the people who created it and what they envision or how they grieve, or it's the people that matter. And that's why we had to have a folklorist on this project.
Yeah. I mean, I think too that, I would just add to that, because like in the past couple of years, as Heather mentioned earlier, like we've done 2-year project where we're looking specifically at Black Lives Matter street murals. So murals that people painted on the street. Like, so Washington, D.C. is probably one that everybody knows about. You'll also know that recently that was removed, right? So, but like 2 blocks long, huge sort of huge scale. But so many of those that were painted on the streets, which had this kind of like really big impact because of how big they were and sort of impossible to miss them. Then they faded away. They were removed, et cetera. And so we think a lot about like, how does the impact of those pieces of art that were communally produced in a lot of cases, how does their impact continue to exist even after the mural is gone, right? And so, it's one thing to like, we did this in a lot of places where we went and we documented it, but we're always like documenting it months, sometimes years after the thing was created. So we're getting like a faded version of it, a version. Sometimes we go places where it doesn't exist anymore.
Some paint splatters.
Yeah, there's some paint splatters on the street, and people ask us like, I'll be out in the middle of the street trying to like take pictures, and people are like, "What are you doing?" And I'll be like, "I'm taking pictures of this mural," and they're like, "What mural?" And because it's like not there anymore, but there still is an impact of it. And we talked to, we have there's an artist here in the Twin Cities.
Donna Ray.
I'm sorry, I forgot her name, but she said to us once, and this is like a really important kind of important idea in our work that she gave to us, which was, we said, well, how do you feel since the mural here in Minneapolis, our home street mural, is gone? And she said, no, it's not gone. It still exists. As long as we're talking about it, it still exists, right? And so that's that part of that idea of kind of like thinking about how these things continue to have impact, even when they faded away, even when somebody removed them, even if it was like a sort of violent removal, like the one in DC, right? Like that was just like torn up. Tulsa, yeah, where these were torn up in the middle of the night, so yeah.
Well, I mean, first, you all are doing great work. Secondly, I have to explain and give a disclaimer why my response was that way when you two mentioned doing archive and not being archivists, which I'm very surprised. Anyone who uses the term folklore, anthropology, sociology, or any of the ologies or arts, we are all archivists, whether we want to admit it or not. And you know what? That was a very hard pill to swallow for myself as well. And I bring that up because a lot of the verbiage that I'm receiving from the two of you is there was an archive before the archive you built, and it sounds like what you two are saying, the actual art was the archive of or repository of these events. Is that what I'm receiving from y'all?
Yeah. I think that's a really great point.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think like sometimes I feel like archives are so associated with the idea of power. Somebody gets to choose what's recorded and who has access to it. And so maybe sometimes we're resistant to calling ourselves archivists because of that. And because it feels like archives are supposed to be done in a certain way with the metadata following some certain kind of guidelines. And we're learning all that as we do it. So we're accidental archivists.
But I think it's important to point out too that like we've learned a lot about archiving both from people who call themselves archivists and who are trained as archivists, like in the academy trained as archivists, and people who wouldn't call themselves archivists, and people who aren't like trained in academia who have a different kind of sort of training and approach to archiving as an endeavor. And I think you're right too, that archives exist sometimes without people thinking of them as archives. They haven't been framed as such, and there is certainly a element of that to the work that we've done, where we came in and took these pictures and put them together. And we're like, I think we thought, like, what is this? At first, we called it a database. We tried to think about how people would use it. But the first impulse that we had was just, we need to take pictures of this and keep this because it's important, and it will go away and people will deny that it ever happened, or they won't have a clear vision of what took place. The story I always tell is like this simple, writing on the side of a Walmart that was shut down in Midway that said "Mama." That was like the first image that Heather sent to me and was like, "Yo, you got to see this." And we knew that was going away. Like, even though that wasn't a Walmart that was in business, it is a private property. Someone's going to come and clean that off. And that sentiment, that powerful expression in solidarity with George Floyd was going to go away. And we wanted to preserve it somehow. And other people had seen things that they wanted to preserve that was important to them. So, I mean, I think like it's not just us that made the decisions on what's in there. It's all these other people who saw things that moved them, who saw things that, just made them stop and pull out their phone and take a picture. And then they contributed to the database. So we like to think about the ways in which it is collectively or communally created, right? And then it becomes our responsibility to take care of it and to make sure that, we find out as much information about each image as possible, that we give credit to the people who took the photographs, that we try to give credit to the people who made the art, if we can find that person, if we know who it is, those sorts of things, because that's part of our responsibility as archivists as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things to unpack in the both of your statement, right? I have to ask this though, and it probably, or it could be self-explanatory, but I would like to ask anyway. Heather, when you saw Mama on the wall, how did you know what was being conveyed, right? Because now it sounds like we're not just talking about murals, we're talking about like messages, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we don't really know. We didn't talk to the person who wrote that, right? It just felt to me when I saw Mama that someone was thinking about George Floyd calling out to his mama. Someone was thinking about what it felt like. Someone was connecting to George Floyd in that way. And it felt like that was big. And we didn't know it then, but maybe we sort of thought that people would connect with that throughout the world. And it's true, because eventually we started to see graffiti and murals from around the world that would say Mama, or would say all mothers were summoned when he called out to his mama, and so we just had a sense that it was important. I feel like in the beginning there was a kind of like triage about it. It just felt like this matters, these voices matter, these names matter, because sometimes it's names, right? And you feel like maybe the names might be forgotten by the broader public. And so it felt like it was important to just capture that and then work through some of the details later, right?
No, I mean, just for full disclosure, when you see me look down, I'm jotting notes, and it's usually one or two words, right? So I want to kind of go from Mama to language, because now, like I said, both of you said a lot to unpack. So with Mama now going to language, because now Todd, you were saying, well, we initially thought database, but something. So what was it that? I guess the easiest way to ask this, that allowed you or evoked in your mind, this is not the right language for what we're trying to do? What triggered or inspired that thought?
Well, it felt like, and again, we're not absolute professionals in this area, right? But it felt like a database should be something that is really easily searchable, that would have basic information. And we felt like it was important for us with the archive to make it sort of rich and always constantly growing. And we wanted it to really bring in the voices of people, artists, people whose lives were affected. And it was important to have that aspect of it, like to have it be a sort of living document and really multidimensional. And so it started to feel like archive was more all encompassing and maybe fit better for that. Does that seem right?
Yeah. And I think, and it's not done, like it's still growing. We're still revising it. We're still adding things to it. Heather said a couple times, like, we want the voices of artists in there. We want the voices of community members, and we haven't done enough of that. We've done tons and tons and tons of interviews connected to this project, but they're not all yet in the archive, right? So that's additional work that we have to do. So this archive is continuing to grow. When we were, sort of standing out on the streets, eventually that day after, we were on the street together, and Heather said something like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had like 200, 250 images? And now we have way more than that. But I think we thought of it as a short-term project. We thought people will send us this stuff. We'll get a couple hundred images and we'll post them, and that'll be that. And it's turned into something that continues to grow. We just had someone contact us recently wanting to send us more images. Like a year and a half ago, someone sent us 6,000 images of the Black Lives Matter memorial fence in DC. There's people, I say this every time that we talk about this project, there's people walking around with phones in their pockets with images of art from the uprising, and we want them to send that to us. And people do. When I say that, next thing I know, people contact us with pictures to send.
It just happened last month. Somebody sent us maybe 50 or 100 pictures, a lot of pictures from June 2020, taken really at the epicenter of the uprising on Lake Street in Minneapolis. And I looked through them and I was astounded because there were so many pieces of plywood panels that had graffiti on them, things that I hadn't seen before, plywood that said things that I hadn't seen before. And I just thought a lot of that plywood, and even the pictures showed this, the plywood being taken down. And some of it was saved. There are organizations that saved it, but some of it was just salvaged and used for other purposes, painted over, used for construction or whatnot. Like some of it's really gone. And so those pictures just seem really valuable.
Okay. I have two questions, but I'm trying to see which one I want to ask first, because I this idea, and I guess I'm gonna have to ask this one first because I can't get it from here. This idea of street art, graffiti, and some murals being, Todd, you used the term earlier, something considered of criminality, right? Because it's an assault on property or XYZ. For me, this archive speaks to it, but I would like to know if you all thought about this or saw it. I guess the irony that on one side of the fence, what you're collecting looks like something, or it's responded to as something criminal, but on the other side of the fence, like in the physical world, it's the result of someone who's being approached as a criminal. And do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's definitely an element to this of perspective, like where you're coming from. I mean, if you think about like sort of generally street art as happening in public space, whether or not it's a criminal act depends on who claims ownership over the space in which the art is created, right? Like, so one of the things that, sort of aided the proliferation of art in the Twin Cities during the uprising was that the art went up on boards, whose ownership was not clear. Like, who owns the boards? The people who own the building, people who put the boards up. Like, what's going to happen to the board? Are the boards just kind of like a temporary thing? Are they trash? Whatever. So not like there were plenty of building owners who didn't go crazy about people going up on boards. And in fact, then they started to see like, oh, maybe this could be like protective of my building. Mm-hmm. Maybe this would be beneficial to how people would see my business. So the idea changed, but it was thinking about like that kind of ambiguity about ownership. And then of course the changing attitudes towards the art itself. So it's always shifting, right? Like, so I think when people think of graffiti as a criminal act, they're thinking of it in a certain way. And often like that way that they're thinking of it has a lot to do with the fact that they don't understand what the graffiti says, that they're not the audience for the expression. And therefore it's confusing. It might be frightening. Mm-hmm. It might seem like, oh, this is marking territory that I think is mine, but somebody else thinks is theirs, like mm-hmm. all this sort of stuff that goes towards that. But on the other hand, as you say, like I like on one side of the fence and on the other side of the fence is a good way to think about that, especially in terms of like public space and street art. Like if you look at it from another perspective, it's somebody saying like, I'm here too. I live here too. My point of view is important. The landscape is something that communicates meaning, and it's not neutral. So when, if people say, oh, you're putting up these political, artworks or whatever, it's like when the art wasn't there, that was political too.
That's right. Yeah.
That's another kind of political expression. Mm-hmm. And the effort to keep that art from going up is political act, yeah. Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it depends on mm-hmm. from which way you're seeing it, what your perspective is in terms of how people think about it. And so when the uprising happened, all of this was in such flux, and things that had previously been, okay, this is absolutely, illegal and you can't do it. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case, or the police didn't have the capability mm-hmm. to keep people from doing it, so things started to change, and then we knew at some point that will probably would sort of go back to the way it had been, right? Like it would sort of revert to the status quo, and people wouldn't be able to do what they had done. So it needed to be captured so we could remember that moment.
No, I dig it. So because I can, because I might be able to put these two questions into one, because I like, it sounds like you guys have also created something that's not necessarily new, but the last couple of years has been spoken about a lot, like a digital museum. And I was just wondering if this is how you advocate for those fallen in these situations. Is there a sense of advocacy in your mission and in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't actually thought about the digital museum before, which is odd, isn't it, that we never thought of that?
Well, you thought about like the Museum of the Streets. I mean, we think of that a little bit, right. But maybe we didn't think about this one.
Right. And I mean, that's an interesting idea too, because I think about how museums actually did some exhibitions. Like there was a museum here in the Twin Cities that did an exhibition about Philander Castile after he died. And a lot of people critiqued that and felt like the museum's not the place to remember a life or to advocate for change, because people don't go to the museums for that reason. But maybe the digital realm is the place to do that. But I think there is advocacy that's involved in it, because it's about getting people to see what is happening, what people are saying on walls, to see what's happening in the world around them, to see that it's not an isolated incident, and to see that it continues, and to really understand the depth of that. So I feel like that's a big goal of the project as well.
I have to ask this because, I've seen a lot of Todd's social media images. You all have been all over the place. So in regards to geography, have you noticed culturally in some spaces these murals or street arts may stylistically look, feel, or have something different based on region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could maybe talk about this in terms of the Black Lives Matter street murals, for example. So that is an example of like Black Lives Matter street murals didn't exist before the one was done in DC. Like we could maybe argue there's one in the Twin Cities in George Floyd Square that is kind of maybe the first one, but the one that sort of like set the tone and people saw it and they tried to imitate it was the DC one. And so in order for people to like recognize those as Black Lives Matter street murals, they had to have a certain amount of characteristics that would identify them as street murals, right? Like, they had to be painted on the street. They usually were letters. They spelled out something like Black Lives Matter, but then the message changed for certain. Sometimes it was like end racism or power to the people, but it was usually a single line of text down a block or 2 blocks on the street. But then when you always see in every single kind of like local iteration of the Black Lives Matter street mural, the local concerns, you see references to a person who was killed in that town. You see references to issues from that neighborhood, So if it's like Andersonville in Chicago, they have Black Trans Lives Matter. That's what they had on the street. And they had surrounding that text, they had portraits of trans folks who had been killed in the last or disappeared in the last years, before that mural was made. That was a concern of that neighborhood, right? And so when you go to each one of these places, you'll see a different style, different aesthetics, a little bit, different content based upon like the concerns of that particular place, but then also enough that is similar so that it is recognizable as a Black Lives Matter, street mural. So those sort of common motifs, which will make it sort of be understood and recognized as part of that collection of expression, right?
Mm-hmm. And it happens on walls too, right? Like there are cities like Philadelphia and Detroit where there are traditions of painting big on walls. And so in those cities, I think it seems really natural that you see images of portraits really of the fallen painted on walls that also speak to larger issues. Like in Detroit, there's this beautiful mural by Sidney James that depicts Malice Green, who was killed by the police in the 1990s. But it has this amazing scroll that has names added on, including George Floyd, but so many other names too. And, we saw the same thing in Philadelphia by an artist who we don't know, but we were driving down the street one day and we just saw this huge mural on the side of a house that it turned out a mother had commissioned of her own son, a portrait of her son. And, she wanted to honor him and remember him, but it also had these balloons that had names of other individuals from all over who had been killed by the police. Mm-hmm. So like some cities really have those traditions of using walls as memorials and to honor people.
Yeah. And
walls.
I think there's, just to add on to that a little bit, I mean, and there's a Philadelphia style, like an aesthetic that's so influenced by the major organization Mural Arts that has, been responsible for so many of the murals. And then in Detroit, I remember we were in Detroit, documenting murals, and we sort of noticed this particular way that the hands were like, there were always these hands kind of almost reaching out of the mural. And it seemed to be like a kind of motif of murals in Detroit. We think that has something to do with the sign painting tradition there. And, so you could go to different cities and just look on walls and start to see like, okay, this is a kind of style here. This is a kind of aesthetic, kind of tendency of this particular place and the specificity of the tradition here. And it might have to do also, it could be the content, right? Like you're going to see these kinds of images here or whatever, or a way of writing, like a specific way of doing lettering, that sort of thing. So yeah, you definitely see those things specifically. But then I think it's also just important to stress that when there's ways that these images, ideas, content, or whatever can spread across the world. and be important, even when it's in a different language, like, so like the example of the dog from South America, the dog, there was a dog that, an actual dog who showed up at these protests in South America. I think it was in Chile, right? Is that? Yeah.
I can't remember his name.
This is what happens when I start talking again about something I don't have everything in my head. But anyway, this dog was a part of their protest down there. And then we found stickers in Minneapolis that were a picture of this dog like jumping over, the barriers during a protest, right? And his name means black cop killer, I think is the name of the dog, right? Wow. And so we started seeing pictures of stickers of this dog, right? And it's like, that's crazy, right? That spreads, across the continent, to a different uprising, but people recognize the same kind of power in that image and the meaning, the same way that George Floyd's image, his face, which is on what we've had pictures of it on the wall in the West Bank and places like that, in Paris, in Uganda, like his face just becomes something powerful and rich with meaning that transcends cultures, right? Or people identify with what his face stands for now, right? And so at the same time that there's like the specific differences, there's these things that have meaning that transcends those cultural barriers.
I love it. So I have to ask this question. So folks can reach out to you all, and we're about to wrap up. Folks can reach out to y'all and send you all pictures and things. How is accessible? Like, so what if people they're not taking the pictures, but I don't know, maybe they're writing a paper, or I have no idea what they'll be looking for, but how are they accessible, and are they?
Yeah. I mean, we're actually doing some, what is the word, reconstruction, or
our archive is under construction.
Under construction. Yeah. It might be always under construction, but it's accessible. I mean, maybe we have a total of 10,000 images, but they're not all in there. And maybe there's like 3,500, 4,000 that are in there. And of those, not all of them are publicly accessible right now because we're working on writing the metadata and so forth. But there are definitely hundreds of images that are available, and people can browse through them. They're organized by categories. So if you wanted to see what was on the Black Lives Matter memorial fence in DC, you could just go look at that category. If you wanted to see images from George Floyd Square, you could go look at that. And people do. We've had researchers, we've had teachers reach out to us and tell us that they have been using it. Or I think maybe not even researchers and teachers, but ordinary people also reach out to us and tell us like, hey, I saw this image, this really moved me. Or I knew this individual and this really moved me to see this image in here as well.
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is urbanartmapping.org. And from there, that's like our main website. From there, we have a tab that says archives. You can get to all of our archives there. Or you can go directly to the archive, which is georgefloydstreetart.omeka.net. So those are the two ways to get to the archive. And like Heather said, it's what we have up is fully open and accessible to anyone. We stress that it's for, educational research purposes only. We don't have a way to keep people from, stealing images and making a T-shirt out of them or something like that. We don't want that to happen. And right. Especially out of respect to the artist, out of respect to, what those images are about, this is not something that we want to happen. So we have a lot of language on there that tries to sort of educate people about how the archive should be used. But if people want to contribute an image, you can actually contribute one image at a time through the archive. Like there's a page where you can upload images and that'll send it to us, or you can email either of us, and we are easily available. If you go to the website urbanartmapping.org, our email is on there. You can send us just like someone did send us, hey, here's a link to a page with 100 images or whatever, and we'll take care of it and make sure it gets in there.
I mean, that's groovy. And I'd say we've just launched our updated website, and we have a resources page. So if y'all don't mind, we'll put y'all in our resources page.
We appreciate it.
Groovy. So here's my last questions for the two of you. And it's quite evident because in so many ways you've said it, but I have to ask directly so you can tell the folks. What is it that you want or hope comes out of this great work?
You end with the easiest questions, huh? I mean, I just hope that we are able to contribute something to the ongoing, impact of what happened. The way that people responded to the murder of George Floyd, which we saw, firsthand here, the way that people went into the streets, the way that people risked their lives. I mean, we forget that we were in the middle of a pandemic. We were in the middle of a lockdown, and people went out into the streets because they believed things needed to change. And now we're in a moment, I think, where there's a backlash, where people are pulling back from this. We had all that sort of corporate support and everything back in those days. Companies were calling us and being like, "Can you help us find someone to give money to?" and whatever. And now they're cutting all that stuff. So I think we want to be a part of the persistence of the ethos that was that moment, and not allow, people who are backing away, who are, lashing out and engaging in backlash, not allow that to take over and erase the reality of what happened. That is a kind of work that we think is important, and we want to continue to do it. I'll go anywhere to talk about it. We will go anywhere. We will talk to anybody to make sure that they understand that what was happening that moment is still happening. This is an ongoing project. This is an ongoing movement, and that, a few people, pushing back against is not going to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, we got to keep making change happen. And I think we also want people to see the work that artists are doing to make that happen, right? In the darkest, most challenging times, artists are out there doing the work. They're envisioning a better future. They're envisioning the way that the world can change. And we can all learn from that.
Well, I thank y'all, and I would ask that you all continue doing the great work. And I look forward to having y'all back on here as soon as warranted or you're free.
Sounds
good.
Lamont.
Thank you for your work too,
Great
man.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
No problem. Thank y'all. And y'all know where to find them. I'll put this up one more time. All right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.